What's going on, guys? Welcome to We Got a Problem. So on the Politics Live show earlier, we had the Tory peer Lord Finkelstein, Labour MP Rushanara, Medhi Hasan, a journalist and salty Remoaning soy boy. Now they were joined by the Brexiteer campaigner Suzanne Evans discussing Tom Watson's speech, which urged the Labour leader Commissar Corbyn and the party in general to take the undemocratic position to ignore the referendum and the democratic vote made in 2016 that said leave, which all UK MPs signed and agreed to honour. Now the Labour MP and the Remoaning low-life shitweasel journalist attempt to argue that we should have a second referendum and how they need to convince their colleagues to ignore the first democratic vote and have another one in the hope they get a different outcome. Let's check it out now.
Has been speaking in London today. Let's have a listen.
Our future doesn't need to be Brexit. So now is the time to speak out more loudly than ever, before any further irreparable damage is done. Only a public vote can break this deadlock, but we will only achieve this if Labour fights for it and champions it. We must do that in Parliament and around the country. Labour must make the positive case.
Rushanara, why does the deputy leader of the Labour Party have to give a public speech in order to persuade the leader of the Labour Party to give full-throated backing for a second referendum?
He's giving a public speech to win the argument among the wider public, as well as to,
who's he talking
as well as to address some of the concerns that some of my colleagues have. Of course, there are differences of views about whether we should have another referendum, and it's right that we should be making the case and winning the argument. I think it's really important that the Labour Party gets off the fence. The front bench position is problematic. We did have a motion at conference which was supported. All the other options have been exhausted. Some would argue that we need to call for a general election in the light of the Tory leadership contest, and I have a lot of sympathy for that argument. If that fails, we still need to move towards breaking the deadlock, which is why the Labour Party needs to move forward and be unambiguous in its position for a public vote.
So
and that's what Tom is doing.
Who are you and Tom Watson trying to persuade?
Well, we need to persuade those of our colleagues who are sceptical about a public vote.
Does that include Ian Lavery, who is the chairman of the Labour Party, Labour MP? Let's show his tweet. Brexit has turned this country into a toxic nation. However, ignoring the 17.4 million Leave voters isn't politically smart, nor indeed particularly democratic, is it?
Well, what I would say to colleagues like Ian Lavery is that the Labour Party has tried the other options. We even had a 6-week negotiation period with the government, and the government wasn't willing to change its red lines. And the only deal that's on the table is the one that Theresa May secured with the European Union. And that's the choice between that and the option to remain in. And what we need to do is be really clear about what we stand for. The Labour Party is not going to be able to out-Brexit the Brexit Party, and nor should they try. And I think some of my colleagues just need to be realistic about what's happening here. And we need, in order to break this deadlock, we need a public vote. We need to put the decision back to the people so that we can be certain that we've got the backing of the British people on whichever direction of travel they want to go down in.
So there we heard Tom Watson's speech wanting to ignore the democratic vote and have another vote, which makes no sense, but how can he start the speech saying we have a future and it does not have to be Brexit, which is complete nonsense. The public voted to leave, so Brexit is the only option. He needs to remember that. If we can ignore the first vote, then why can't we just ignore the second vote? These socialist shitweasels are demented. The Labour MP, in defence of Watson's statement, goes around the houses to avoid stating the message was aimed at Commissar Corbyn, because she knows she will be sacked in the morning if she does. The gulag awaits for any dissenters. While maintaining her support for ignoring democratic process by insisting on a second vote. She states the Labour Party have done everything to get Brexit through, which we all know is complete rubbish since every single snivelling shitweasel in Parliament that refuses to accept no deal as an option is preventing Brexit. So they haven't done everything at all, have they? Now let's get into the next clip.
Crazy own goal for the Labour Party, absolutely crazy. The 5 million Labour voters, we think, voted leave in the EU referendum. 56% of Labour seats with sitting Labour MPs voted leave. Labour stood on an election in 2017, an election manifesto backing the referendum. This is a flagrant breach of all that and a kick in the teeth to hard-working Labour voters, supporters and activists out there who support...
Suzanne, just like in the Tory
Can
party...
I just finish and say, you know, Tom Watson started his speech saying, we have a future and it doesn't have to be Brexit. Well, I'd like to say, Tom Watson, both this country and the Labour Party, if you want to have a democratic future, it's got to be Brexit.
The problem the Labour Party's got, however, is that if it doesn't support a second referendum, it'll be undercut by the Liberal Democrats in a serious way. It's just like people like me face that problem with the Conservative Party, which is that the base vote, in the same way the Labour Party's base vote, wants a solution which I think is a mistake. You have to, at some point, you have to sort of face those things. So the Labour Party cannot take the position that I agree that it probably should take, it can't. It will be because its base vote has decided that it wants a second referendum, and I think the Labour Party couldn't face an election without moving in that direction.
If it goes in this direction, you talk about it losing ground to the Lib Dems. How much more ground is it going to lose to the Brexit Party?
Not that much. Not as much.
Oh, I
Medhi?
think
Not as much.
This is the problem. I mean, that Ian Lavery tweet is a reminder of the problem with referendums. It's why I can't stand referendums like Clem-Attlee and even Margaret Thatcher at one point. You have this kind of fetishizing of a single vote 3 years ago, 17.4 million people, as if it's a fixed number of people just sitting around, monolithic, with no change in views, no change in people who are alive.
But they did vote to leave.
They did vote to leave. People also voted in a general election. We also have other general elections. This idea that one vote once and then we just sit around and worship is... But that's the problem with it. That's why you shouldn't have the... I was against the referendum.
But the referendum's happened.
Agreed. Voted to have it.
Agreed. But I also live in a country with parliamentary sovereignty. I do believe a Labour Party, which did have a pro-Remain leader, and the problem is it doesn't have a pro-Remain leader. If it won a general election with a manifesto saying we're staying in, I think that would trump a referendum.
Well, let's stick with what the Labour Party is going to do now, because there was going to be a special meeting. A special meeting of the Shadow Cabinet was supposed to be happening to discuss the issue that Tom Watson was talking about, and that was full-throated support for the EU and Remain, and then pushing Labour to support it. But that meeting's been cancelled. So what does that say? The leadership...
Well, don't get me started on leadership. I mean, leadership is a disaster on this issue. Yes, a lot of them do listen to the stats that Suzanne put out and think it's going to be electorally damaging, but you can't sit on the fence. I'm going to have to go home and take a shower, but I agree with Tony Blair when he said recently Corbyn can't sit on the fence and play to both sides forever. It worked in 2017. As Danny points out, it probably won't work.
But Suzanne is saying they should sit on the other fence.
They should absolutely sit on the other fence. You know, if Labour wants to win a general election, which personally I sincerely hope it doesn't, but a bit of advice here, if Labour is going to win a general election, it's those target seats that it needs to reach are mostly leave voting target seats. So those marginal seats, like Watford,
Also, when you say hard-working people, just to address the hard-working people, you support a no-deal Brexit, which would destroy the economy. So when you talk about hard-working voters, your plan is the one that's going to... Every serious economist says it's going to destroy the British economy.
We're getting confused between the things that we think and what our analysis is of the impact on voters. My view is, if the Labour Party... I don't approve of having a second referendum, but if we did have a general election and the Labour Party allowed its vote to be split between themselves and the Liberal Democrats, it would get hammered if the Conservative Party took all the vote. You could get a no-deal Brexit in a general election in that way. So the Labour Party cannot take that position.
Rushanara, is there going to be a change from the leadership anytime soon?
Well, a lot of us are making representations to the leadership for a change, and I hope there is, because it's in the national interest.
I know you hope there is, but do you think there will be? Do you think there will be a declaration for a second referendum, whether or not it's possible?
There needs to be, in my view, and I hope that's what happens. It's not in my gift to make that decision, but I hope that the leader of the Labour Party does change the position of the Labour Party to make it absolutely clear that we are going to stop sitting on the fence and support a public vote. Because it's in the national interest to do so.
To ask to vote in favour of a referendum in the House of Commons, provide people with a voice, and then decide not to implement the result.
All right.
And I think that's
because
we're going to finish it here. We're going to finish it here.
This in Parliament.
Because the Labour Party's voted against every deal.
We're going to finish it here and talk about something else.
It's not a good enough deal.
You two.
The Brexiteer Susan Evans points out how batshit crazy the Labour commies are. Around 5 million Labour voters actually voted for Brexit, according to Suzanne. She points out how the Labour Party stood on a manifesto to honour the referendum and how Labour have kicked hard-working Labour voters in the teeth. Of course, the Remoaning shitweasel Labour MP pulls faces because the truth does not support what she wants to say. It goes to show these politicians only care about their own agenda, not the will of voters who put them in these positions of power. Suzanne does well to finish on the point that Labour seem to be missing. If we want a democratic future, the vote needs to be honoured. The Tory Lord then agrees with the Labour position regarding a second referendum, which is disgraceful, but we knew there are many traitors within the Tories just like Labour. How can he sit there and say he thinks Labour should push for a second referendum? It's pissing in the pockets of Tory voters and Brexiteers alike. I mean, it spits in the face of democracy in general. If we can ignore votes, then we don't have to accept any general election. It's a slippery slope to go down. Of course, in comes Remoaning soyboy fuckpick Medhi Hasan, making the claim it was 3 years ago, people might not feel the same now, like it was only one vote, he says. Why do we have to listen to it? And then tries to use the analogy that we have more than one general election. Of course, completely ignoring the fact that the winner of a general election becomes the government, so the democratic process is completed. The process for the referendum has not been completed yet, so how could we vote again? There was a clear vote to leave, it needs to be honoured. The shitweasel goes on to claim that if Labour win a general election, we can ignore the 2016 vote and remain in the EU. This guy is a complete idiot. Labour winning the general election would not mean the vote could be ignored at all. The lone Brexiteer on the panel rightly states that if Labour want to win the next general election, then it's not Remain they need to back, it's get a Brexit done policy, which she hopes they don't, as do we all. Because no one wants Labour in government, obviously. Causing him to respond with the same old Project Fleer claim that a no-deal Brexit will destroy the country or the economy, with no evidence to back it up, claiming every serious economist thinks it will ruin our economy. Which is bullshit. Many economists think the complete opposite, and the last economist I covered on the BBC didn't even know that the UK was #1 for international investment, so I can hardly trust these Remainers and economists if I'm honest. So, on that show we had 3 Remainers against 1 Brexiteer, once again on the BBC, showing their complete bias towards the socialist agenda to remain in the EU. Even if the Tory Lord is now technically a Brexiteer in name only, we all know it's an attempt to rescue his party from the abyss. He's still a Remainer at heart and admitted to vote and remain in the EU. Now I'm going to end the video there, guys. Let me know what you think down in the comments section. Don't forget to like and share the video as it helps the channel a lot, and I'll see you all in the next video.